Okay, I hate to admit this one. I really do, but I gotta be honest with you guys. Because it's a whole part of his channel. The Don Callis family might actually be cooking right now. And I know how this sounds coming from me because it's no secret that I have not been a fan of this group, having so many members. Every time it feels like the roster is about to breathe a little. Something else gets swallowed up into the family, and the groups just keep getting bigger and bigger. I've complained about this a lot. A lot of you have complained about it too. It's felt bloated for a while, but Beach Break changed something in me. Watching that whole night play out, I actually started seeing the potential feuds and storylines sitting inside this group. And I think it might end up being absolutely integral to AEW going forward. So, let me finally break down why it flipped for me, right? Let me take you back a bit first because I want you to understand where I was coming from before Beach Break. I was disappointed when Kevin Knight went heel and immediately joined the group. This is a guy who came up as a high-flying, exciting, likable presence, part of Just Beat, someone you were supposed to want to see win. And then just like that, he turns his back on everything and walks right into the family. At the time, it felt like just another name getting swallowed up. Another guy getting his identity replaced with member of the group instead of getting to be his own thing. And honestly, that's been my problem with the Dead Riders too. If we're being real, whenever a faction gets this big, my first reaction is always the same. This is gonna water down everybody else, right? Nobody in there is gonna feel special anymore because there's just too many people wearing the same jacket, right? But here's an oversight. Same mistake I made with the Dead Riders. I wasn't realizing the other side of how factions like this are actually built. A group this big isn't built to make everyone feel like a star. It's built in a way to annoy you, to frustrate you, to make you want to see it fall apart from the inside. That's the actual design. And once I started watching it through the lens instead of just being mad about the size of the roster, everything clicked. So the first layer of what makes this work, and this is the big one for me, is what actually happens between the members of the family itself. Look at Kyle Fletcher right now. This man walked out of Beach Break as a new AEW International Championship after beating Konosuke Takeshita in what was honestly one of the best matches I've seen all year. And the second the match was over, he was thanking Takeshita for the history they had together. He was telling him down, telling Mick Foley right there on the camera that Takeshita was never his friend, that he was always the number one guy in that pairing, and Takeshita was just riding his coattails the whole time. That's not a guy who thinks he's part of a team. That's a guy who thinks he's the main event of the entire group, and everyone else is just finished around him. And then, in the same segment, here comes Kevin Knight, strutting out like he's the one who actually matters here. There's a guy who already has the belt Kyle Fletcher used to have before relinquishing it because of injury. He's now calling himself Jet 2 belts, basically telling the whole world that he's the one who deserves the World Championship shot. Not Fletcher, not anybody else in the group. So now you've got Fletcher thinking he's the guy. You've got Knight thinking he's actually the main focus now that is holding God of his own. That is not a stable structure. That is two egos in the same jacket, both convinced they're stars of the show. And Don Callis, sitting in the middle of it, is either gonna have to pick a favorite or watch this whole thing eat itself from within. Either way, there's drama you can manufacture with an outsider. That only works because it's happening inside the family itself. Now, here's the second layer, and this one might actually be the most exciting part of the whole thing. Andrade. This man got completely disrespected for the family. He said himself right to Don Callis' face at Beach Break. He worked for the group. He was promised the AEW World Championship. And instead, what did he get? Overlooked, pushed to the side while Fletcher and Knight got their moments. So what does he do? He turns around and lures the entire Don Callis family into a trap, with Darby Allin right there beside him. And an exploding skateboard that literally went off in Brian Cage's hands. And here's the part that really gets me. Andrade has completely crushed his first persona doing this. Somehow, some way, turning against a group that used him has made him more over than he's been in a long time. That's the beauty of it. He didn't need a big feel-good redemption speech. He just needed to be the guy standing up and saying, "You owe me," and the crowd ate their shit up. There's a former member coming back to burn the house from the outside, and it's already working. And I don't think that's a one-time thing either. If Andrade can walk away and immediately become this compelling just by turning on them, it opens the door for it to happen again. Anybody who's ever worn the jacket and gotten shoved to the side is a potential future problem for Don Callis. The well the family can keep going back to. And yeah, Takesta. I don't even need to spend much time on this one because it's already been proven at this point. Takesha went to the beach break as a reigning international champion. And even in defeats, he put on one of the best matches of the entire year against Fletcher, getting his arm worked over in the entire match. Still fighting back with a bloke down the bomb, still kicking out of the brain pass, all that shit. This man doesn't need the family to be booked as a story anymore. He's already the story on his own merit. So even outside the family drama itself, you got Takeshita standing there as proof that this entire thing has generated a genuine top level star. Someone who can carry a program with anybody in the group and make it feel important. It's not a small thing. It's a kind of guy who makes every single one of these interfamily conflicts hit even harder because we already know he can go the distance with any of them. So why this all adds up to something bigger? I'll put it together. You've got Fletcher, Flesh the Crown, already talking like he's above everyone else in the group, including the guy he just beat. You've got Knight, sitting on his own title, calling himself Chair 2 belts, clearly positioning himself as the one who actually deserves the World Championship conversation. You've got Andrade, a former member, already proving his turning on the family is a viable and generally over story on its own. And you've got Takesta, standing just outside the family entirely, already established as a guy who can go with any of them and make it feel massive. That's not 4 separate storylines competing for one. It's 4 different directions the same conflict can bend, all coming from one giant group. Favoritism between Fletcher and Knight, revenge from Andrade and anybody else who gets fed up down the line. Continued statements matches from Takeshita proving the outside world can still hang with anybody wearing the jacket. And Don Callis in the middle of all of it, having to juggle every single ego while trying to keep the group from imploding on national television. That's the part I actually missed before. I was so focused on there's too many people in the group that I wasn't seeing what all these people actually give the story once they start turning on each other. A smaller faction doesn't have this many built-in landmines. This one does. And Beach Break lit the fuse on more than just one of them at the same time. So yeah, I hate to admit it, I really do. But this group might actually be cooking right now. Not because I sadly love the idea of one faction holding this much gold and taking up this much of the roster. I still think it's part of a fair criticism. But because I finally see what it's actually being built for. It's not built to make you like everybody in it. It's built to make you wait for the inevitable moment when it starts tearing itself apart. Whether that's from the inside with Fletcher and Knight, or from the outside with guys like Andrade, who got left behind and came back angry. And if AEW plays this right, letting the egos actually collide instead of just parading everybody out together every single week, I think this becomes one of the most important stories in the entire company for the rest of the year. So there it is. I said it, the Don Callis family might be cooking. Let me know if you saw what I saw at Beach Break, or if you think I'm still wrong about this. Either way, I want to hear it. I'll see you on the next one. KAW, this is the best time to turn Brian Cage face. Okay, so this one's going to sound weird at first, but just stick with me. Brian Cage, and I know what some of you are thinking already. Cage, the guy who spent years just standing behind other people, holding their jackets, doing the dirty work for whoever the loudest voice in the room is. Yeah, that guy. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Because here's the thing, I don't know exactly what it is. I can't put my finger on the one specific reason. But every single time I see this man on my screen, especially recently, I get this feeling I can't shake. This guy could be a really good face. Like, a genuinely great one probably. Not a give him a nice moment and move on face. I mean, an actual, real, the crowd is standing and cheering for him face. And the wild part is, I didn't always feel like that. Not even close. So let me walk through how I actually got there, because the journey matters just as much as where I ended up. Rewind all the way back to when Cage first showed up in AEW. This is early on The company is brand new. Everyone's trying to figure out who the stars are gonna be. And then comes Brian Cage. This is massive, jacked up powerhouse, and almost immediately he's going after the AEW World Championship. Not working his way up like other people, not a few years of building, straight to the top of the mountain. Right out of the gate. And I did not like that. I gotta be honest. At the time, I thought he felt like a cliche. Big scary muscle guy walks in, act like he owns the place, demands a title shot before he's even earned it in the eyes of the fans. I seen the story 100 times before in wrestling. Right? Nothing about it felt new to me. And on top of that, I liked the champion at the time. I was invested in the story already. So here comes a guy, kind of just like parachuting in the main event scene. And all I could think was, who is he? And why does he think he belongs there? So when he lost, honestly, I was happy about it. Not even a little conflicted. I remember feeling like, good. That's what happens when you skip the line. Go back, go to work, and then maybe I'll take it seriously. That's where I was with Brian Cage. Not a fan, not even close actually. So after the loss, his story didn't even slow down or reset the way I expected. Instead, he got pulled into Taz's group. Remember this, right? Taz, the guy who used to be one of the most legit tough guys in the building, decides he wants his own little factions of tough guy wrestlers. And Cage becomes one of the guys under an umbrella. And along with that came the FTW Championship. This whole for the whole world title that was supposed to represent this hard-nosed techno-prisoner style of wrestling. On paper, I get what they were trying to do. Right? It's a cool idea. A title that isn't sanctioned by any official body. It's just earned or respect and toughness. But in practice, it's just never landed the way it was supposed to. It felt like a side quest. Like a title that existed in its own little bubble, away from everything that actually mattered on the show. Cage held it, defended it here and there, but it never felt like it moved the needle. It never felt like it was building him towards anything bigger. It was just kind of like there. Like whenever I think back to this whole chapter, and the word that comes back to mind is experiment, and not a successful one. I felt like AEW was trying to find something for this guy to do, trying to give him an identity, and it just didn't stick. The Taz faction eventually faded out. The FCW title basically disappeared from television, and Cage was kind of left standing there, like, okay, what now? Then the real fall happened, and this is where things get rough, honestly. After that, whole thing fizzled out. Something happened that I really wasn't expecting. Cage didn't get repositioned as a singles guy trying to climb back up. He didn't get a fresh restart in his own story. Instead, he just kept becoming someone else's guy, someone's muscle, someone's backup. One group, then another group, then another group, different names, different leaders, different colors in the jacket. But the role was always the same. Stand behind the guy who does the talking, get involved in the numbers game calls for it, take the fall when the story needs the fall guy, rinse and repeat. And along with all of that came a losing streak that just kept stacking up. Match after match, appearance after appearance. And it always seemed to end in the same way. Cage on his back, someone else's music playing, someone else getting the moment. At some point, I stopped counting the losses because it honestly just became the expectation. You see Brian Cage walk out and you already kind of knew how he was gonna go. Not because he wasn't talented. Everybody could see the talent was still there. Physically, he still looked like a machine. But the booking, the story, whatever you want to call it, it just kept using him as a stepping stone for other people's stories instead of building one of his own. And somewhere in there, something changed in me. Here's the part I really didn't expect to happen. Something in the middle of all of that losing, all of that henchman work, all those different factions using him and discarding him. I stopped disliking Brian Cage. And it wasn't even a conscious decision, honestly. It just kind of crept up on me. I started feeling for the guy. I started feeling bad for him. Because at some point, watching a talented person get used over and over as furniture for other people's storylines stops being satisfying. Even if you didn't like him to begin with, it starts feeling almost unfair. Like, this guy clearly has more in him than generic muscle to hire, and nobody's giving him the chance to show it. And then on top of the booking struggles, his body starts falling apart too. multiple knee injuries, a brutal, painful recovery that he was very open about, describing it as some of the hardest rehab of his entire career. Setbacks in the recovery, a strained back during training, right when he's about to get back, over a year away from the ring completely. So now you've got a guy who's already been booked as an afterthought for years. And on top of that, his body is putting him to the ringer just to get back to the wrestling ring at all. That combination, watching someone get worn down from both directions at once, that's what really flipped something in me. I went from actively rooting against the guy in this first year to genuinely wanting to see him get a real shot by the time he was fighting, just to work back through that curtain. Now, and then he actually came back, May 2026, after over a year away. He showed up on Dynamite, answered the open challenge for the TNT Championship, and even though he came up short in that match, something about that return felt different to me. Maybe it's because it looked like he never missed a day gym, despite everything his knee had been through. Maybe it's because of how he talked about the whole situation after, the excitement about getting a chance to basically press restarts on his run in the company. He talked since then about wanting more, wanting to branch out on his own instead of just being another name in someone else's group, wanting real singles program, wanting a run at the world title, even bringing up wanting a shot at some of the company's bigger tournaments down the line. That is not a guy who, after everything, after the injuries, after the losing streak, after years of being someone's henchman, is still sitting there saying, I want more, I want my own story. And that's exactly why I can't shake this feeling. Like, this is why now is the perfect time. Because think about the story that's already been written for the guy. Whether anybody planned it or didn't, came in looking like the big next thing. And the fans, myself included, rejected him because it felt too easy, too fast, too cliche. Then they got humbled, generally humbled, stuck in a faction and they never fully clicked, holding a title that never fully mattered, and then spent years after that as nothing more than a muscle for hire, for other people's stories. And his own body turned on him and took over a year of his career away completely, right in the middle of trying to fight back. That is not a story of an entitled guy who skipped the line anymore. There is a story of a guy who got humbled, then got hurt on top of that, and is still standing there saying he wants to matter. You cannot write a better foundation for a face turn that way. The crowd doesn't need to be told it deserves a change. They've watched the whole journey unfold in real time over years. They've watched him get rejected. They've watched him fall down the card. They've watched him get hurt. And now they get to watch him fight to climb back. This time on his own. Not as somebody's backup plan. That's the story that makes people cheer. Not a guy who's always been on top. A guy who fell about as far as you can fall, physically and in terms of how the crowd saw him. And is still trying. I think he will crush it. Because here's the thing. The physical tools were never actually the problem. This man still looks like he was built in a lab somewhere to be a professional wrestler. The kind of look, the kind of presence. It doesn't disappear just because the booking doesn't do him any favors. Right? If anything, coming back looking exactly like that after everything his knee went through just adds it. It shows the same kind of stubborn, refuse to quit mentality that made me start feeling bad for him in the first place. Give this guy an actual single story. Let him step away from being someone else's guy. Right? Let him talk about everything he's been through. The losing the streak, the failed FCW experiments, the years of being the henchman, the injuries, the fight to get back. Let the crowd hear the story from him directly instead of just watching it happen to him. I think it hits. I think it hits hard. Because at the end of the day, people don't just fall in love with wrestlers who've had it easy. They fall in love with the ones who got knocked down again and again and kept getting back up. And whether AEW planned it or not, that's exactly the story Brian Cage has been quietly building this whole time. So yeah, it's his time to set him face. I think the crowd's already there, whether they admitted it to themselves or not. I know I am. I went from happy to see him lose, to feeling bad for him, to now sitting there saying give this man a moment. And if AEW pulls the trigger on it, I genuinely believe he will crush it. That's where I'm at with this. If you felt anything close to what I just described, let me know. And if you know I'm completely wrong, let me know too. I'll see you on the next one. Okay, so I gotta talk about this. This one's been sitting in my head for a while, and I just need to get it out. WARDLOW. Right? If you know AW, you know the name. If you don't, stick with me because this isn't really about wrestling. This is about believing something, even when it keeps letting you down. But yeah, let's start with the wrestling part first. I still think WARDLOW can be the face of AEW. I know what that sounds like right now. I know the guy hasn't had a real match since like March 2024. Like over 2 years. 2 years of the guy just not being there. And every single time it looks like he's about to come back, something else happens. Something breaks, something tears. It's like the wrestling gods looked at this man and said, no shit. And also no shit after that. And also no shit after that. Right? But let me back up. I gotta be honest with you. I've always pulled for this guy since the start. As MJF's hired muscle, just standing there, arms crossed, looking like a mountain that learned how to wrestle. Back then, he wasn't even talking much. He didn't even need to. You looked at him and you just knew. And the guy is different. And then he broke out on his own. He became his own guy, won the TNT championship not once, like 3 times. 3 times he held that belt. And every time he had it, it felt like it meant something. It felt like the title actually mattered because he was the one carrying it. So when I say I've pulled for him, I mean it. This guy isn't just a guy I started liking last week because of a video I saw. This is years. This is watching every rise and fall, right? And here's the thing about the wrestling that a lot of people forget. You need a big man. You need someone who looks like he could actually hurt you. Not because he's mean, but because he's built like that. WARDLOW has that. He's got the look. When you put him next to anybody else on the roster, it just makes him look smaller. And that's not an insult to anybody else. That's just what a real heavyweight does. He changed the size of the room. It's not like, it's even in the way he moves, big guys are supposed to be slow. You know what I mean? That's the stereotype. Slow, chunky, boring to watch. WARDLOW isn't that. He can move, he can fly. For a man his size, there's a power bomb he does off the top of the rope that still to this day makes crowds lose their minds. I've seen it live on TV and the whole arena just erupts. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because the crowd feels something real when it does it. So when I picture what AEW needs at the very top, the face of the company, the guy who represents the whole brand, and I'm not talking about Will Ospreay. I picture someone who looks like a star before even saying a word. And WARDLOW got that. Like, also he's an original. And this part matters more to me than anybody might think. WARDLOW isn't a copy of anybody. He doesn't come from a big wrestling family. He wasn't some indie darling that everyone already knew. For about 10 years, he was going to go to AEW and become a crush. He built his own character from almost nothing. Big scary henchman. Into breakout star. Into a guy who talks with real emotion, real anger, real heart. You watch his promos and you can just tell none of it is fake enthusiasm. Or at least it's what I think. It's a guy who actually means what he's saying. In a world full of wrestling, copying the same 5 moves in the same 3 phrases. Having someone who feels like his own thing, that's rare, that's valuable. I might be glazing, but you can't manufacture that in a lab. Either a guy has it or he doesn't, and WARDLOW for me has it. He's also very good in the ring. I don't think this one needs a whole lot of explaining if you've actually watched him wrestle. But let me say it anyway, because some people forget this man can go. He's not just a guy who stands there and throws punches. He's got timing. He knows how to sell pain, like he's really feeling it. He knows how to build a story, right, or a match so that the crowd is holding their breath. His matches against some of the best in the world, they didn't even feel like mismatches. They felt like 2 real athletes fighting for something. That's not common because a lot of big guys get by on just being big. WARDLOW actually worked at the craft. He actually cared about being good, not just being intimidating. And I think that gets lost sometimes because people only remember the last thing they saw. And the last thing for a lot of people that they saw from WARDLOW is him getting heads or being gone, or him standing ringside or instead of being in the ring. But now let me talk about the injuries, because here's the hard part. Here's the hard part where I have to be honest instead of just being a fan. His injuries have sure been annoying. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. This man's body has been through it, right? A knee injury that kept him out for a year. A brutal car accident that left him in so much pain he could barely sit down on an airplane. And he still flew across the country for work instead of going to the hospital. Then he finally got back, joined up with Don Callis' family, made it look like a redemption arc was finally starting. And then, within about a week, he tears his pec. Just like that. Gone. Again. And before all that, he tore his biceps completely. Days before, he had to go film America's Gladiators. And instead of getting surgery right away, he wrestled through it. Well, not wrestled, but pushed through filming a whole TV show with a torn biceps. Wearing long sleeves just to hide the damage. That's not a guy who's soft. That's a guy who has been unlucky in the worst possible ways. Over and over. At the worst possible time. So yeah, it's annoying. It's more than annoying, honestly. It's heartbreaking if you've actually been watching. Every single time this guy claws his way back to the door slams shut again. Not because he stopped trying. Not because he stopped caring. Just bad luck stepped up on top of bad luck. But even with all of that, I still believe it's going to work out. And this is the part I really want you to sit with, because it's not really about wrestling anymore. WARDLOW himself said it. He said the torn pec is the first injury in his whole career, indies included, that ever actually made him stop and take time off. Before the car accident, he just never stopped for injuries. He wrestled through a bad knee. He wrestled through a bad hamstring. The only reason he wasn't on TV before was creative. Not because of his body. His body never quit on him until the car accident finally forced it on him. Think about that for a second. This is a guy whose default setting is to keep going no matter what's broken. That tells you everything about who he actually is underneath that muscle and the power bombs. That's not the character. That's the actual person. And he says something else that stuck with me. He said, in the last 2 years, basically everything he's loved and cared about got taken away from him almost all at once. His dog, his friend, wrestling, even just the ability to work out like he used to. All of it gone at the same time. And he still says he's close. He still says he's coming back as the biggest, baddest version of himself that anybody's ever seen. That right there, that's the whole point of this video, if I'm being honest with you. It's easy to believe in someone when everything is going right for them. That's not just belief, that's just noticing. Real belief is when the evidence keeps telling you to give up and you don't. Real belief is watching somebody get knocked down 4 or 5 times in a row and still saying, nah, I think this is gonna work out. That's where I am with WARDLOW. I'm not blind to it. I see the injuries, I see the timing. I see how many times AEW has tried to give him a moment and life just yanked it away at the last second. But I also see a guy who has never once quit on himself, even when quitting would have been the easy, forgivable choice. The guy who wrestled through pain most people would have just stayed home for. A guy who's still saying I'm close after 2 years of getting told no by his own body. If AEW is smart, and if his body finally lets him, this is still the guy who can be the face of the whole company. Not because he's had the smoothest road, but because he hasn't. When the road keeps caving in, keeps walking anyway. And there is something about a story like that. A guy getting back over and over again that is different than a guy who never fell in the first place. So yeah, injuries have been annoying, beyond annoying, right? But I still believe it's going to work out. And honestly, even if it doesn't, even if his body never lets him get there, the fact that he kept trying anyway, that already says something about him that no championship belts ever could. That's it. If you feel the same way about this guy, or even if you completely disagree with me, I want to hear it. Drop it below.